Hello, Magic players. It's Gutler here again. I want to talk about one of the conversations that happens a lot around the ban list for Commander, and that is why is Soul Ring unbanned? They should totally ban Soul Ring, right? We all know Soul Ring. It's one of our favorite cards, right? 1 mana to play, an artifact comes. You can just tap it for 2 mana the turn you play it. Gives you a nice advantage. Now, here's what it now everyone says, oh my gosh, that's OP, right? They banned Mana Crypt, they should ban Soul Ring. It's I know it's in every deck. There's you know 8 million decks that play Soul Ring, according to EDH Rec. It's very widespread. It's in every precon, so if you ban it, you instantly make every precon that's ever sold invalidated. But let's just talk about it in power level reasons and argue why Soul Ring doesn't need to be banned. So first up is there's different theories about how you gain advantage in games of Magic. You've probably heard of the theory of card advantage, right? Where whoever draws more cards wins, or whoever is able to play more cards wins. And sometimes you'll have a card that is worth more than one card, right? Your opponent has 5 creatures, you play your Wrath of God, it kills all 5 of their creatures. You spent one card, which is the Wrath of God, you destroyed 5 of their cards, their 5 creatures. Now they're down, right? Or you might have a card where you're spending it. It's one card. It makes 3 tokens, right? So now you have 3 tokens. Those tokens are still one card. So if one token gets chump blocked or killed by a removal spell, right, you still have the value. 2/3 of the value of the card is still in play as the other 2 tokens, right? So that's a theory of card advantage. Well, there's another theory. It's pretty old now, but it was kind of new in the past, right? Which is called mana sum theory. And mana sum theory is part of just a regular argument that the player that spends the most mana in a game will win. And I mean, obviously, you have to spend it on things. You can't just, you know, it can't be turn 7. You tap all 7 of your lands and say, I spent 7 mana, right? And then you don't play anything, right? You actually have to cast it for spells, right? And the idea is, even though spells have different level of impact, right? If you are someone who has spent, 25 mana on spells, and your opponent is someone who's only spent 17 mana on spells, that gap of 7 mana has resulted in you having uh, one or two or several extra spells that have gone into play, and that gives you an advantage over that opponent because you spent more mana, right? And so that's how Soul Ring works. Like Soul Ring is not card advantage, right? It's not a Wrath of God. It's not draw spells. It's not discard. It's not anything like that. Soul Ring gives you an advantage because it gives you more mana, right? That should be pretty self-explanatory. And the reason Soul Ring shouldn't be banned, right, and it should stay legal forever, is because the advantage it provides, right, 2 extra mana, is actually not that good of an advantage. And people are going to blow their minds. Oh my gosh, what do you mean it's not that good of an advantage? Well, let me make the argument here. So, like we were talking about with mana sum theory, the idea is whoever spends the most mana is likely the winner of the game, right? They played the most cards, they deployed the most things. Soul Ring gives you the ability to spend more mana than an opponent, especially if you have a turn 1 Soul Ring, and then you can spend more mana on turn 2 than the following turns. Now, what? Oh, isn't that OP? Isn't that a problem? Isn't that huge? It's not a problem in multiplayer games, right? And the reason for that is going to be twofold. One, it the advantage of Soul Ring is its impact is strongest on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. I'll give you. It really has to be an early game Soul Ring in order to have a sizable impact on the game. There's plenty of times late in the game where if you top deck a Soul Ring, right? Oh, it's turn 8. I drew a card. It's Soul Ring. It's actually a weaker card. You would have rather drawn Temple the False God or something like that, right? Where instead of having to pay mana to get 2, it just as a land drop that gives you 2, right? So these are things where it's like the the power of Soul Ring is very strong, high early, but then it is it's going to decline on a graph. The later it goes in the game, right? There's going to be times where you're like, I really just need to top something good. I need to top something good, and then you draw Soul Ring, and you're like, well, Soul Ring is a good card, but it doesn't do anything, right? It's really only impactful in the game. So that's the kind of thing where yes, it can come out early, and it can be strong early, but that does not mean it wins the game. And part of my argument is going to be that the reason Soul Ring isn't um, it doesn't take over the game with mana advantage, even when you have it on turn one, uh, is because it is because we have a near universal presence of ramp in commander decks, right? Or even if decks that aren't running ramp, they are running some other form of way to accelerate the game that makes it so that like the ramp that Soaring provides isn't relevant for the entire game, right? So the argument is that yeah, Soul Ring. I play Soul Ring turn one. Maybe I have a 2-drop, something like a Signet, right? Maybe I don't have a Signet. Maybe I just have Soul Ring turn one, and then turn two I play a 4-cost thing, right? My opponent that I'm playing against, they also have the ability to play a Signet on turn two, or something like Relic of Legends. They can play that on turn three and then tap some legendary creatures to add more mana. Or they could play something like Worn Power Stone, right? On turn three to get 2 mana as well, the same as Soul Ring, right? These are all options that players have in order to also ramp in Commander. Now, part of the reason is that why these cards matter as opposed to this card is that we don't live in a world where Soul Ring is the premier ramp and everyone is eschewing other points of ramp. People are running Soul Ring in addition to other ramp cards. So what's happening is that if you have a Soul Ring start, good for you. Your opponents have you've been able to spend more mana because you have a Soul Ring, right? That's giving you a mana advantage. Now, your opponents have been able to also deploy their mana rocks or other mana dorks or other rituals or other ways to ramp in their deck, right? Green ramp. And those ways that they're playing allow them to catch up to you in terms of mana spent. So the idea that Soul Ring is giving you this huge advantage is really only true if it's in the first few turns of the game. If you're deploying things that are outside that window, right, that are later in the game, right? Your opponents have also ramped, and they're also able to match your mana production that the Soul Ring is providing you. So the Soul Ring is not giving you this giant superior amount of mana spent advantage in terms of mana sum theory. It's giving you a slight advantage, and your opponents are able to either equalize that completely by being able to produce 2 mana from a mana rock on their turn, or having multiple mana rocks that each tap for one, giving them two advantage anyway. Or it could be a thing where they're able to even surpass you, because if you have Soul Ring giving you 2 extra, they might have a way to give them even more than that. They could have something like Fanatic of Ronus, right, that taps for 4 green, right? They could have something like um, a mana reflection or gauntlet of power that's giving them double mana, right? They could have a cabal coffers that they're using to make a bunch of mana with that, and they might even have things like deserted temple to untap it and make even more mana, right? So the advantage that Soaring provides you in terms of mana sum is good, right? It's a good card, but it is not an overwhelming amount of mana like a that cannot be suppressed by opponents, because we have this universal presence of ramp index, right? So we have a bunch of cards that people are using that can totally equalize Soul Ring in terms of play, right? Players could play things like these certain mana dorks that tap for 2 mana. They could play Skyshroud Claim. They could play other things that allow them to spend more mana, and they may even surpass mana production in your deck if you have a Soul Ring. Now, of course, Soul Ring is a universally played card, so it is the kind of thing where you're able to play at turn one, you can play more ramp and more ramp and more ramp, and then you have this huge amount of mana in play, and then you might win off of that. But of course, then if you just have all ramp in your deck, right, you do have to eventually win with something. You don't just win with the number of mana rocks you have in play. You have to have other factors. Now, there are other ways you can equalize mana spent too, and that part of that is going to be in not actually spending mana, right? Because we have other cards that, this is other cards that allow us to spend mana in other ways, right? So we have things like Traverse the Outlands, which, I mean, this is sort of more like a mana sum card, right? Where it's going to have the ability to just generate more mana for you by, I played it, I've searched up a bunch of lands, now I have all those in play, right? But then you also have other factors like, oh, someone has played Omniscience, right? They didn't really do anything, but now they have Omniscience in play. that makes all their spells 0 mana, so they get to play all their spells that they want. And Omniscience, for the purpose of mana sum theory, we're not going to count the spells they play with Omniscience as counting as 0 mana spells, right? We're going to count them as their actual cost of the spell, right? So if they're able to deploy Omniscience and play it, and then they have a hand where, everything is 7, 8, 9 mana, and they play 5 spells, right? That could be a turn where they spent 30, they gained a 30 mana advantage according to the mana sum because of something like Omniscience, right? We also have cards that make spells free. Like we have things like Lurking Predators, there's Chimmel, the Inner Sun, there's things like Improvisation Capstone, where or there's Cascades, right? So like the value of like a Maelstrom Wanderer. Maelstrom Wanderer is not really an 8-drop. Like it costs 8 to play Maelstrom Wanderer, but then you also get the value off the 2 cascades that you play. And it depends what you cascade into, what the mana sum theory of a Maelstrom Wanderer is. So you can always have a Maelstrom Wanderer where you cascade into 2 7-drops, right? So you've basically spent 22 mana for 8 mana, right? And that can be an overwhelming advantage, right? But that overwhelming advantage that you get from a Maelstrom Wanderer giving you a bunch of big drops like that. But I suppose it could cascade into 2 1-drops. You get Llanowar Elf and a Birds of Paradise, right? And you've only gotten 10 mana of cards spent for your 8 mana investment. But the thing is that the cards like Maelstrom Wanderer and cards like Lurking Predators and cards like Omniscience allow players to vastly outperform a Soul Ring in terms of mana spent and surpass it in terms of mana sum theory. So that's why Soul Ring shouldn't be banned in terms of power level, because it's really only giving you advantage on turn 1, 2, and 3 when it's you know quite similar, where it's you're right, it is stronger than other issues, but it's not a card that is giving you an overwhelming advantage. Now let's compare this to Soul Ring in 60 card formats, right, where so people point out, Soul Ring's banned in Legacy and it's restricted in Vintage, it's really OP. Yeah, there's a reason for that. Because if it wasn't banned or if it wasn't restricted in Vintage, you could play 4 copies of Soul Ring. You could have turn 1, I play my Soul Ring, I tap it, I play 2 more Soul Rings. Now I untap on turn 2 when I have 8 mana, right? That's a crazy amount of advantage that someone could have, right? So that's why Soul Ring has to be banned, has to be restricted, because it's not a card that you can only have one of in your deck. It's a card you can have, you could have 4 of if there was no action taken against it. So that's just perfect for Soul Ring, but it is also the kind of thing where when you play those other formats that are 1v1 formats that have Soul Ring, either banned or restricted, those formats are not playing a universal presence of ramp among opponents. You're playing your Soul Ring to do things, but your opponents are playing, if you had Legacy and you had, oh, I have turn 1 Soul Ring, what could my opponent have on turn 1? They could have Suspend Rift Bolt. They could have Aether Vial. They could have Delver. They could have a Glistener Elf. They could have all these other options that are things that they're playing on turn 1 that aren't Soul Ring and aren't um, anyway, do it. So what happens in those other formats is because there isn't the universal presence of ramp, and there aren't sort of these big cards, like Maelstrom Wanderer and these things, to let you catch up in terms of mana spent in the mana sum game, the player who has the Soul Ring can just run away with the game, which is why people say, oh, if you play Vintage Cube, you should draft Soul Ring, right? It's just such a great card. You should totally draft Soul Ring if you see it. It's amazing, right? And it is. You're right. You're playing a 1v1 20 life format. Your opponent probably doesn't have anywhere near the amount of ramp you have. They might have, what's the best thing they've got? Dark Ritual. It's not going to be anything, like your Soul Ring, right? And that lets you deploy cards and play spells in a way that they're never going to catch up to you in terms of mana sum theory, because you just have such a big advantage. You're way out in first place, right? That's not true in Commander. Commander does have the built-in catch-up mechanics, right? The games go longer. The Soul Ring isn't always a turn 1 play, right? The Soul Ring isn't, sometimes it comes later and is irrelevant. Sometimes, an opponent gets to deploy something that lets them, get a lot more mana value out of it than you're expecting, and that rockets them in a first position. Sometimes your opponents just are able to ramp out with more ramp than you, and they are the one with the mana sub advantage, right? And even though you have Soul Ring, you don't have that advantage anymore. So this is why like the power level of Soul Ring is contained in Commander, and even though there are a lot of people that say, "Oh, we need to ban it, we need to ban it," it's actually not breaking the format, right? If it was breaking the format, we would know. Soul Ring's in 8 million Commander decks according to EDH data. You would be able to see it breaking the format. It's not breaking the format because games go long and opponents have plenty of opportunity to either play ramp to catch up to you in terms of mana production or even surpass you in terms of mana production. And so now they're the ones winning the mana sum race, which is what you're playing Soul Ring to give you an advantage in that early mana sum race, right? Um, but that doesn't mean that you having Soul Ring in that race is a deciding factor where you're like, ah, I've got it. I've got the Soul Ring. I'm coasting. We're gonna win now, right? It's like, nope. There's plenty of opportunities for that to be reversed on you, right? And we're not even talking about removal. We're just talking about your opponent playing their cards and developing their board, and that board develops better than your board, even though you have a Soul Ring, right? That's fine. Now, moving on to other issues. We already talked about precons. We already talked about um, you know, some other things. We didn't really talk about cost. I know everyone says Soul Ring is cheap. However, Wizards of the Coast has been selling super fancy foil shiny Soul Rings for forever, and it's kind of weird to just ban it out under people um, where that would be. You're saying that like, oh, we're gonna ban the card. It's $3. It's like, well, it's not actually $3. People have versions that are worth hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars, right? For these Soul Rings, it's a controlled cost. Um, let's see. We talked about mana sum theory. What else can we say about Soul Ring? It's fine. It's fun. Play it. Have fun. It's not always good every game. It's not always a good top deck. It's not always um, something you want to play on the thing. Oh, one thing I would have mentioned. Everyone, when they argue for Soul Ring, they're gonna say, "Oh, but the Mulligan chance, the fact that here's what we got. You have a deck of 99 cards, right? You're gonna draw 7. You have about an 8% chance to get Soul Ring in your opening hand, and counting your first draw, right? Of course, if you keep a hand and then you just draw Soul Ring off the top on turn 1, that's a pretty good draw. That's about an 8% chance to occur. Now, people will say, oh, but everyone should mulligan for Soul Ring, right? If you don't have Soul Ring in your opener, everyone is going to mulligan their open to try and get a Soul Ring. Everyone's going to try and everyone's going to mulligan aggressively for Soul Ring. So they won't just take their first hand and say, oh, no Soul Ring, throw it back. Let me get a second 7. Oh, no Soul Ring, throw it back. Let me get a second 6. No, oh, no Soul Ring, let me get a second 5. What they'll do is they'll say, okay, everyone loves Soul Ring. Everyone's going to aggressively mulligan for it, right? We would know it's a problem if this was happening because this is not happening. People are not aggressive. People are not mulliganing away good playable hands just because they don't have Soul Ring, right? They're People know how to mulligan, right? They know how their decks work. They know how to mulligan. They're mulliganing away hands that are bad, hands that don't have enough lands, hands that have wrong color mana, hands with, you know, 2 lands and everything else costs 9. There's people know what they're doing, right, when they're mulliganing. So people are not making mulligan decisions just based on the presence or absence of a single card in their list, right? And so the thing with Soul Ring is that whenever you see someone and they're arguing for it, they're going to say, oh, the chance of someone having a Soul Ring in their opening hand, or like one player having a Soul Ring in their opening game, is like 44% or something like that. And it's like, okay, that is a made up statistic, right? What you're doing is you're going and you're saying, okay, people are going to aggressively mulligan for Soul Ring. They don't. We see it in regular casual commander. The only place people do mulligan aggressively is CDH, right? That's because CDH decks run very few mana sources. They run a lot of mana sources, but they run very few lands. So a lot of times they have to aggressively mulligan just to have a hand that is playable because they're running like 29 to 27 lands, right? They just don't have anything, right? Even though they do have a lot of mana sources, they need to actually like put lands into play to cast them, right? Or unless they have like certain moxes, right? So we are seeing that like CDH are aggressively mulligan. For those of us in casual, We're just looking for keepable fair hands, right? And we get those. And do we see Soul Ring 44% of the time among opponents? Every other game, someone has a turn one Soul Ring? No, that doesn't happen, right? The statistics are, you have an 8% chance, and then you're saying, oh, well, all my opponents have an 8% chance. So you're saying, well, the chance that something happens is we're going to add all those 8s together, so we get 32% chance. So one person has a Soul Ring in the open hand. I don't even think that's fair. I think that's, you know, it's very low. Like the number of games that start with a Soul Ring on turn one, it's a real number, but you know, is it every other game of Magic? It is not every other game of Magic. It's the kind of thing where, you know, if you play several games a day, you'll see it, a few times a day, someone will have a Soul Ring. But it's not the kind of thing where, you know, it's people are valuing it aggressively mulliganing it for it. So always disregard people telling you the percent chance is crazy. People are just gonna get it turn one. It's always someone has a turn one solving and always they're running with the game. The best argument is, well, did that person actually win the game with their Soul Ring? And it's like, no, they didn't. Yeah, usually what ends up happening is I've seen games where someone has had a Soul Ring turn one and they've managed to snowball it into a win. Usually it's because, well, one, the game was not a 4-player game, it was a 3-player game, right? So we were down a person, right? Or you have weird situations where someone has turned one Soul Ring, and then what have they played after it? Well, what's the best 4 drop that people are going to play? What is it, like Smothering Tide, I guess? It's not like you go turn 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor and then it's over, right? Like that would, like Legacy would be like over if you like turn 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor or somebody, right? There's no like card on turn 4 or turn 5 that people point to where it's like this card could just end the game by itself, right? You just play it on turn 5, the game's over, right? It doesn't happen, right? What you end up seeing is that people that are able to play the Soul Ring and get a win are usually using it to play even more ramp, right? Where they're playing, other things to use that Soul Ring mana to get them even more headed mana advantage, which is giving them even more mana spent for mana sum theory, which is allowing them to actually just win the game off the mana sum, right? Where they've spent, the 30 mana and you've only spent 12, right? That's the kind of thing where mana sum theory can come in. Um, Now, there's other options, right, where you also have, um, in terms of mana sum theory, right, where instead of having the Soul Ring go into ramp, it can go into a scalable threat. So, like, there's a Hydra, I think it's Colonian Hydra. It's like a 4/4 Hydra for 5 mana, but, like, when it attacks, you double the number of counters all permanent. So, like, you're attacking for 4, 8, 16, 32. Like, that's the kind of thing where, if you have one of those early, like, I've seen a game where someone had a turn 1 Soul Ring, and then turn 2 they had something, and then turn 3 it was Colonian Hydra, and then because it was a such an early game, they were able to then buff the Hydra with something else and then attack and then double even more counters. And then it basically clocked me and the other player out of the game because we're still, my turn 3 is like Burnish Heart, and that's like, well, that's not going to do anything to Clone Hydra. And even if I get to, sack the Burnish Heart the next turn and do my ramping, right, that's not going to be something that lets me. That's not going to be anything that like answers to Clone Hydra, right? But that's also because it is a 3-player game, right? So the idea is, when there's not a third person there to help with the removal check, of course they're going to be able to more likely run away with the game because instead of having to deal 120 damage, they're only having to deal 80, right? We've taken off a, a third of the work they'd have to do, so they have to do, um, 2/3 of a victory, right? Instead of winning a whole victory, right? Which would be harder with a Colonial Hydra, right? So, anyway, that's the kind of thing where, you look at Soul Ring and you look at these situations and you go, I see Soul Ring a lot because it's played a lot because it's played 8 million decks. But it's the kind of thing where we would know if Soul Ring's a problem, and Soul Ring is not a problem. People just hate on Soul Ring. They go, I hate Soul Ring. I don't like it. I want to get rid of it. They have their reasons for their dislike of it, but Soul Ring is not a problem and should not be banned based on power level reasons. I don't think it's going to be banned based on any other reason, right? It is the exception. It is the one where you can't take hundreds of precons and ban a card of them and then make them invalid for play because they contain a Soul Ring. There's just no reason to do that. I think it'll be legal forever, but I think in terms of the just mana sum theory as well as a lot of the mulligan math that people use. People are very dishonest with the assessment of Sol Ring, and I want to correct that and let the record stand. All right, Magic players, that's all I have for you today. You have a wonderful day, and I will see you all later. Bye for now.